Beruma. We are now ready to begin our panel discussion titled International Development Cooperation, Challenges and Prospects. Allow me to introduce our moderator, Ms. Latika Berk. Dear moderator, the floor is yours.
It's on? Yes, now it's on. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming after lunch and hopefully after some coffee for what's going to be a great discussion on the future of multilateralism, international development, and perhaps one of those topics that goes a little unexplored at conferences like this. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists today. We have here on my right the Deputy Foreign Minister of Armenia, Robert Abisohominian. Thank you for having us in Armenia at this fantastic conference. I'm sure we're all in agreement about the great job that Yerevan Dialogue has done here. Pedro Manuel Moreno, Acting Secretary General of UN Trade and Development. Ivana Zhivkovic from the UNDP. Kaveh Zahedi from the UN's Food and Agriculture Programme. Hishrao Sohibzoda, Special Envoy from Tajikistan. And David Fernandez-Piana from the University for Peace to the UN. So let's set the scene a little. We all know that it's not an easy time to be in the development space. Governments around the world from the Trump administration have been gutting their development budgets. And even in the UK where I live, there is a very live bipartisan support for raiding development aid to pay for rearmament. And this is only going one way. So how are each of you developing your strategies with this difficult, challenging environment? And are you coping? Ivana, maybe to start with you.
Thank you very much, Latika, and it's great to be a part of this panel. So, of course, you know, with the increased need of efficiencies and with the full support to the UNAT reform of the Secretary General, UNDP has started looking into ways to, for more efficiencies even more than 2 years ago. We are part of the UN system, but we are funded by voluntary contributions. And what you just said about major donors, that is affecting our core to a large extent. The fact that we work in 170 countries, and out of those are 61 are crisis and fragile contexts, core funding that we receive from donors, it enables us to act quickly when a sudden situation arrives, a major earthquake, a war, or a similar. So this funding is really needed, and we have to adapt to the ways to work with less of it. Even before the UNAT, we have conducted this business model review in a way to be more efficient, and we have been talking quite a lot about doing more with less. I think now we're at an inflection point to be able to carry out as needed. But however, we very much advocate for the return of the donors, and it's not only the ones you mentioned, it's also a number of other OECD DAC donors that were leading this way in the previous years. Not to go into details how we want to make efficiencies, I can just say that you know, we have taken this very seriously, and of course we're adapting with agility. I think it helps that we have a little bit of an entrepreneurial model of operating, and that helps us as well. Another thing that we really strongly want to work on is to keep the presence on the ground in the countries, and also to keep our people to the extent that we can. We believe that this trust with the governments ensures our success and also delivers what the governments request us to do.
Thank you, Ivana. Pedro, how are you seeing the challenge of adaptation?
Thank you, Latika. I think that this is a moment to really think how we are going to have to, you know, to approach multilateralism work in general. You know, this let's do more with less. I have problems accepting that, because if you really want to be relevant, if you really want to contribute to the country's needs, you have to do better with less, but not more with less, because then you dilute what you do, and then at the end of the day, you are spread too thin, and it's not really the response that countries, I think, need. So I would say that in this very moment, I would say that we need to have less duplication and more partnerships. There are countries that are now members of the UN that didn't even exist as a country when the UN was founded 80 years ago. You know, now we have regional banks, regional institutions that do wonderful things that, you know, so not only, we don't have only the UN to do these things, we have other partners. Countries are now much more prepared. Regional institutions are much stronger than before, so we have less, so we have to partner more to have less duplication and to try to do better with less.
Kaveh, I can see you nodding in furious agreement there. What's been your experience?
No, of course, I agree with Pedro that, that this notion of doing more and more and more with less and less and less spreads us thin, and we're not delivering the impact that is expected of us. I think that, as you know, I fear that what we're seeing in development aid, this sort of reset of development aid, is the new normal, and we have to adjust to that new normal. I sense that we're not going to bounce back and suddenly be back to peak aid in the way that we saw it a couple of years ago. So
Kaveh, do you not see governments rushing to legislate 0.7 of GNI? Do you think those days are definitely gone?
I sense that we have to adjust to, as I say, a reset. And a lot of the conversation about financing now, when we talk about financing in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity that comes to Yerevan soon, or the Climate Convention, it's a conversation not just about development aid. It is about finance as a whole. And I think that's what we need to also adjust to. How can we use this very scarce and precious overseas development aid to leverage much bigger investments into the critical things that we are working on with the countries? How can we use development aid to leverage in the private sector, by buying down some of the upfront costs, some of the risks? How can we use it to get the carbon markets up and running and investing? How can we get it to, in a way, reorient some of the domestic public finance investments, including in the agricultural sector, and some of the misdirected investments in, say, subsidies that are working at cross purposes with the things that countries are now committed to on biodiversity and otherwise. So I think we have to adjust to this new reality, and it's an opportunity to really look at this issue of blended finance, if you will, and how we can crowd in much bigger and higher levels of investment into the critical issues of biodiversity, into, from our perspective, sustainable and resilient agriculture.
Kaveh, is that fertile ground? Are you seeing a good take-up and a response from the private sector? Do they want to be involved like this?
Well, I mean, when it comes to agri-food systems, there's no choice, because the majority of the market is the private sector. And the private sector, just like any farmer, can see what is happening. They feel the impact of a changing climate, right? And the need to build resilience, the need to move to more resilient seeds and crop varieties, the need to change agricultural practices to be better adapted to this new climatic future. So yes, I think that it is fertile. It's not easy. If you talk, for example, of the carbon markets, right? Agriculture has never been a major part of the carbon markets. Forestry, yes, and we have done a lot of work on that, the reducing emissions from deforestation, etc. But agriculture per se hasn't. How can we capitalize and make sure that that sustainable, resilient agriculture also can attract the carbon markets? That's less done. And I think that the biggest untapped market is the policy optimization or financial optimization at the national level. How can we align public policies, so as I say, they're not at cross purposes, and make sure that those investments are all aligned to bring the biggest impact on things that can deliver on biodiversity, climate, food security, livelihoods across the board.
So you three have all spoken, you represent UN agencies. Let's zoom out a little, because the UN's taken a bit of a reputational battering of late. President Trump's speech to UNGA last year was many things, but one of the standout lines he said was, not only is the UN not solving problems, it should. Too often it's creating them. Now, President Trump has gone on to give the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace his stamp of approval in the White House. Minister, would you be able to discuss how you saw the UN's role in negotiating or brokering that peace or contributing that compared to the US? And does President Trump have a point here that the UN is not fit for purpose in the way it should be in developing peace and security in our world?
Well, thank you for the question, dear Latika. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel, and I greet my fellow panelists. Julie, let me start from your first question, Julie, and briefly touch upon it from the state perspective, Julie. What you have mentioned about the decrease of funding, it's really true, and the consequences, I should say, here are already visible. And when development assistance contract, while the instability increases, first of all, it touches the most vulnerable countries, the countries that are affected by pressure, conflict, climate changes. And on the other hand is the risks with fragmentation. The development assistance is shifted to become a geopolitical one. But if development financing is continuously deprioritized, at the same time we risk addressing the symptoms, not the root causes. When it comes to our region, I believe during these 2 days a lot has been said about the peace established here and the contribution of President Trump to establish peace. But let me approach the peace in our region from the perspective of our today's panel. And in this regard, I want to put forward a very simple question. Is there a development without peace, or vice versa? Is there a peace without development? In our case, I should say that these two notions are complementing each other. There is a development when peace is established, and here the situation in the South Caucasus clearly shows, and the agreements show that there is a huge potential for development, starting from connectivity and the implementation of the agreements on unblocking the regional connectivity, the establishing new logistic routes with Trump Route of International Peace and Prosperity. And of course, the contrary, the development will enhance the peace in the region. Because in our case...
I mean, in some cases not even enhance, but secure the peace, right?
Yeah, secure, yeah, I fully agree with you. And our example clearly shows this. Because connectivity is the point where the interests of both Armenia and Azerbaijan meet. And it secures peace, and it will be the prerequisite for development and further institutionalization and enhancement and strengthening of the peace.
And I imagine, Minister, that must be quite a compelling story for the Armenian people to see the potential of their own economic development because of peace.
I believe so, but I think our government still a lot of job to be done, because we need also to present the benefits of the agreements. We need to present to the society the benefits of peace. Because look, throughout the last 30 years, our independence, our society hasn't seen this peace, and we don't know what does it mean to live in peace. And we should learn from the very roots what does it mean to have a stable situation on the borderlines, not to wake up in the morning and read in newspapers that someone died on the border, there was a shooting on the borderline. So it's something new for us, and we should learn, and for this we should, it has already been mentioned actually, we should nurture this achievement, we should nurture this peace.
David, what lessons can be learned from how Armenia has built peace and now hopefully will build its economic development as a result of that?
First of all, I would like to thank very much and deeply the Armenia for inviting the University for Peace to take part on this important dialogue. I have to say that now is the moment then to reflect about the United Nations, about the future of the United Nations in this 80th anniversary. The United Nations was established with the main idea to save generations from the scourge of war. This is the preamble in the preamble part of the UN. Is the UN delivering the mandate provided by the fathers and mothers of the UN chapter? And I think I have to say the UN is full of success on peace and security. We need then to make an assessment.
We have wars raging around the world. How has that been a success?
Yeah, let me explain in this regard. The world, we as a humanity, we have been living in war forever. Let's be clear. Since 1945, how many wars we had in the world? An example, since the end of the Cold War, we have wars in Bosnia, in Rwanda, in Iraq, in Syria. This is the war that we have today is not the first war. There will be many others that will come. The idea is how we can, as a United Nations, we can deliver as a one. And as I say, we have many examples from the past that the role played by the Secretary General of the United Nations has been important. To refer some of one, the crisis of missiles in Cuba, also Iran, Iraq, Namibia, many cases. It's endless cases. And going back to the question that you posed me, it's about in the region. The peace is fragile, is extremely fragile. And then for that, we have a study report by important think tanks saying that the 70% of the peace treaties are broken after a period of 7 years. This means that we need to make sustainable peace in this wonderful region. And I think economic growth, it's important. Also inclusivity, to bring on the table all the actors, and in particular, we cannot forget that women should be part of the solution. I absolutely disagree to see no women in many of the peace treaties. And also education. Important to invest in education for peace, because many of the old grievances that should be overcome through education, and this is the mandate of the University for Peace, to bring education for peace to the new generations, to create new leaders. And I'm very optimistic. I want to be optimistic because to work on peace, we should be optimistic about the good steps taken by the government of Armenia and also Azerbaijan and Georgia to make a region of integration, to work in a more integration framework.
For those of you in the room, we will be opening up to questions soon. So if you have a burning question, please get yourself ready and maybe give me a show of your hands if you have one already, and I'll know to come to you. David, just back on that point, overnight, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, has laid down a challenge for the UNSC. He says he wants to put up a resolution in which he will challenge China and Russia to back their motion on Iran, that it's illegal for Iran to be doing what they're doing in the Strait of Hormuz. That's a test. Who do you think is going to pass?
I have to say that the US is part of the solution on the conflict in the Hormuz Strait. I think let's say that war and peace always alternate. Let's remember this important book of Tolstoy, War and Peace, on Tolstoy, and I think diplomacy should remain, and the ceasefire should be extended, because this is the only solution to bring stability and security in the region, because the effects, the economic effects in the world are extremely important. And also regarding to Marco Rubio, he already referred and he applauded the efforts of the peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And then I want to underline also this important peace treaty signed last year in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Let's talk about some of the progress we're making. In Tajikistan, you're going to be hosting a conference soon on climate and biodiversity. how do you see the prospects for collaboration and development? Do you see them deteriorating, or do you actually see them strengthening in the benefit of smaller states?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to express sincere gratitude to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, to the people of Armenia for the very excellent organization of this dialogue, and I hope it will be very resultative and very informative for all of us, not only for diplomats and for civil societies and other, but it opened for us new perspective to estimate and to value what is the reality of our modern world. Regarding the UN system and multilateral system, I absolutely agree with distinguished representative of main and key institution of UN here. It's a great pleasure to be with them. And also for Tajikistan, you know, when United Nations adopted the agenda of 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, it was 30 years ago approximately when discussion had started. And you know, not only Tajikistan, but many countries of our region, especially Central Asian region, we adopted our national development strategy regarding the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's in all aspects. It's in social, economic spheres, in other aspects. So our national development strategy meets with UN agenda for 2030s. That's why...
Do you think that if those SDGs were put up today, you would still be signing up to them?
You know, just we want to reaffirm our strong support to multilateral system, which at the core should be United Nations. And if United Nations will be stronger, all our projects and programs will be more resultative, because UN institutions became the part of our government system. All sustainable development projects and programs we are realizing in cooperation with UN institutions. That's why we are supporting all initiatives which will assist to develop UN system. But the system which is now, for example, it meets our needs and our strategy, but I don't know the reason why in some part of the world, in some region, they will not, the work of UN was not so resultative like in our region. I don't know, maybe some political reason, some geopolitical reason, or some other things. But for my country especially, I think the cooperation between Tajikistan and UN institutions should be one of the best examples of work within the multilateral system.
From what you're describing, it sounds like you've taken into your own governance the UN goals, and that's
Yes.
been a positive development for you.
Yes.
Ivana, one of the dichotomies of the current situation is that governments are cutting aid for arms at a time when your work has never been needed so much more in conflict zones. How have you met that challenge?
Thank you for that question. Well, I first also wanted to bring a point to the major donor shifting, the funding shifting, going towards somehow mutually beneficent investment partnerships. And for those, we need to have, and they need to be grounded in country-owned systems. So what we see as our role is to support the governments to create a conducive investment opportunities for their own countries to strive, and then we support them with investment de-risking, with blended finance, and so on. I can also give an example of, I thank very much the ambassador from Tajikistan for his kind remarks on the role of UN system. And I can say in Central Asia overall, UN is very well received, and we have very good collaborations, but I can also say we have good collaborations with the governments overall. What is very important is that some of our program countries, the countries that we work in, are starting to invest into their own development. And overall of almost 5 billion of UNDP's delivery annually, about 20% of those are government's own investments, which is remarkable, and we see that as a trend that needs to be sustained and somehow also encouraged. This is not always the central governments, it can be municipal governments, local governments, and others. Your question to how do we react quickly, I mentioned the core funding, which enables us to go in very quickly when something happens. I can give you the example of the war in Ukraine, to which very early on, as we were already present, we supported the humanitarian response to a large extent, but we also supported the handouts to IDPs in an electronic kind of systematic way. And we supported women-led businesses, relocation of small and medium enterprises to the western part of the country. And sometimes we have even seen people that were displaced twice. So, the need was really great, and UNDP was able to support the government in their efforts. And to this day, our most important support is in the energy sector, in providing the large infrastructure for the not only for electricity but also for heating and water for millions of people. And not only that we are doing this recovery or early recovery work, we are connecting it to the long-term development. At the same time, working with the government, and this government is very able on green and digital solutions, which of course they're quite advanced on some of those, but also considering how development should be when the situation becomes more peaceful. So we're quite engaged in this context. I can also talk about other fragile and crisis contexts, and maybe some of the most inspiring visits are the ones where we, maybe even with small projects, we support women-led businesses and entrepreneurships in some fragile regions and conflict-prone settings. And it's very inspiring to see how these women can take their destiny into their hands. And not only that, with some small support of maybe $5,000, they also employ 8 other women in the village, and they produce some product that they then want to sell and export.
It's such an inspiring example. Ivana, do you feel like you're living in two different worlds? At the geopolitical level, we see these criticisms of the UN, of development, of aid, of international cooperation, and then on the ground, you're seeing these very live examples of bettering and improving lives with a sustainable path ahead should there be peace.
Well, that's what keeps us going, because in the end, we're there for the people and for the countries that we serve. And, the headwinds somehow we will weather to the best extent possible. But somehow this is a never-ending inspiration. And when you see that work on the ground, when you see how, some maybe children or young people that deserve a chance with very little investment, you can provide them with that chance, teach them digital skills, or provide some kind of skills that will enable them to get better employment or go to school. It's really inspiring.
Minister, one of the other areas where we see this similar dichotomy is climate. You're hosting a COP biodiversity conference. How have you found the appetite for international collaboration on this?
During the recent years, I should say that the environmental issues has become at the forefront of international agenda. And from this point of view, if the biodiversity issues are very important for the member states. Of course, it's very challenging. Of course, it's challenging for Armenia especially, because when we were elected to be the next host of the biodiversity, of course we didn't have these resources in order to be able to address the challenging issues. Thanks to the partnership with many member states, with many international organizations, of course we are now on track. At the same time, we work and put many efforts in order to ensure the inclusivity of the processes, which is very important to have on board each and every interested parties. And when I say each and every, I mean not only the member states, but also the civil society, the NGOs, indigenous people, local communities, like defenders for the rights of women, girls, everyone who wants to say something about the biodiversity issues. During the conference in Yerevan, that's going to take place in October this year, they should be around the table and they should have an opportunity to contribute to the decisions that are made in Yerevan. And going further, I should say that in Yerevan we will have very important discussions, especially for the first time we are going to have the review conference. And we'll take stock of the commitments, targets and goals to see where we are ahead of 2030 and what needs to be done for achieving the goals.
So I take from your answer, you're not retreating from multilateralism at all. You're all in.
This is a very challenging question, especially for me. So a person who has passed most of his career in multilateralism can be biased in answering this question. So this is my... for us, for Armenia, actually, I believe the multilateralism is not a diplomatic preference, it's a strategic choice. And it's obvious, if I simplify the answer to the question, I should say that it's in the real world, it's obvious that small countries, if not say always, but often doesn't have opportunity to be part of the global development, global processes. And the multilateral platforms, multilateral organizations are the only place where they can have their voice, they can be part of the processes. In this regard, we attach much importance to our cooperation in multilateral platforms, despite the challenges that, of course, they have been also mentioned about the challenges, about the needs for reforms, which are also ongoing, but still the multilateral platforms play a very important role. Coming also back to the previous question on establishing peace in our region. Even in this regard, like the multilateral platforms played an important role, at least for providing a platform for dialogue. In each and every multilateral gathering, there was an opportunity to meet, to discuss the issues. Even after the establishment of peace, the multilateral organizations, multilateral platforms play a very important role in confidence-building measures, in building trust between the societies, which is between the countries, which is very important for strengthening the peace. For example, with the Azerbaijani side starting to build confidence with each other. So one of the first agreements is to try not to block each other in multilateral platforms, at least on the issues which are not concerning to Armenia and Azerbaijan, which was not the case previously.
That is a fascinating example. Do we have any questions in the room? Great, lots of hands up. Maybe, I think it's a lady here in the red jumper. Thank you, please go ahead.
Is it on? Good afternoon, thank you very much for the discussion and for your insights. My name is Eva Polak and I'm representing here both Kasimir Pularski Foundation and Polish Center for International Aid, which is the Polish NGO with over 20 years of experience in development cooperation and humanitarian aid. And I would like to pose the question to Mr. Minister Robert Abishamonian. what are the current Armenian development priorities and how different entities, including also on the bilateral level, and thinking about also the third sector, how can assist Armenia in pursuing those goals? Thank you.
That's a great question. Do we have any other questions? We can take a few and then get the panel to respond. No, Minister, would you like to take that one?
Thank you for the question. If I answer very briefly, the main priority of the Republic of Armenia when it comes to development is the capacity building of our institutions. We should pay much attention to the capacity building in order to be able to take over all the programmatic activities that we have with many international organizations. Of course, they are doing a great job when it comes to reform agenda of the Republic of Armenia. Of course, they are doing very important projects for the development of Armenia. But at a certain point, the Republic of Armenia should have these capacities to take over this responsibility and to continue its development agenda by itself. So I believe the cooperation, the development cooperation, first of all should take into account the capacity, should use the local expertise, should have a component of training the trainers in order to have these capacities left in the Republic of Armenia. When it comes to the partnership, I believe a variety of partnership, like starting from Council of Europe to European Union, the UN agencies, UNDP is a very valuable partner for us. So we try to cooperate with all the interested partners who can contribute to the development of Armenia.
My final question is to all of you. The theme of Yerevan Dialogue 2026 is riding through the storms. What kind of storm is it from where you sit? Is it a thunderstorm? Is it a tornado? Are you battening down the hatches or have you gone into the bunker? David, we'll start with you.
Yes, I think it's a web storm. And then, how is going to respond the multilateral system? How? I agree with Dr. Pedro when he say about less resources, because the most important is to reinforce the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, human rights and development. And but the multilateral system have come to remain. In fact, we are living in a multilateral system how many years? 100 years only? If we start with the League of Nations and afterwards with the UN, will remain. But the most important in this storm is also to find opportunities. All crisis brings opportunities and new gates to open. And then this initiative of the UN18 is an opportunity because there are so many duplications in the system. And we need to be more agile, more effective. But really what I think in this storm, we need to connect with the people. We need to make more pedagogy because the United Nations is doing an excellent work. And the people that is also in the chapter of the UN, we the peoples of the UN, they don't see that. Here we have example of UNTAC, FAO, UNDP, but there are many others. They are doing on the ground an important job. And this is also multilateralism. It's not only the pillar on peace and security that I referred before, that there are failures and also success. And then, and I think I agree that we are in a storm, but the storm started in 1945. Always storms.
It's a long weather system. Kishrav.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with my colleague. But in my personal view, that we are starting to go to more strong multilateralism system, because it meets our needs, especially the needs of developing countries and least developed countries and landlocked countries such Tajikistan. And just, I think this time is the time to think about what we did before. And we all know what's going on now, but we are afraid to give concrete value or estimating more openly. You know, it's very difficult to say it directly, but we are all feeling what's going on now because of some developing countries, some powerful countries, some big players in the region or in global areas. But in any case, I think it's multilateral system should continue to adopt, but by leading role of UN at three main pillars. It's first of all, like it was before, peace and security, because the United Nations roles in providing peace and security in global levels, it was always, I think UN will continue this role, to play this role. And the second pillar is sustainable development, which cover all aspects of our political, social, and economic lives. And third is human rights. I think just to make more strong United Nations, it's very simple. The promises, the obligation should be done. Developing countries promised a lot for reaching the sustainable development goals, but no finance there. A lot of developing countries not access to finance resources. That's why if developed countries will realize or will implement their promises and their obligation, I think it's very easy to decide a lot of problems globally. Thank you.
Kaveh.
So I think, as others have said, it is in some ways the perfect storm. And I mean, let me explain why from our perspective. We talked a lot about security in this meeting, and of course, we believe that there is no chance of security without food security, right? And yet we live in a world where over 700 million people are living in hunger. And this goes totally contrary to us and our charter, right? FAO was set up a couple of weeks before the UN, we're quite proud of that, 81 years ago, with a charter that has at its core a world free from hunger. And yet the statistics tell a different story. Why is that? Well, part of it is the economic development story and inequality. People just haven't been able to access food, nutritious food, the right quantities of food. Part of it is climate change that is undermining development and certainly impacting agriculture and food systems probably more than any other sector. Part of it is conflicts. These continued conflicts have an impact. We all know and saw the ripple effects of the conflict in Ukraine. Now the recent conflict in the Persian Gulf, it's got an impact. It's not just disrupting energy markets, it's disrupting fertilizer markets. Fertilizers are not available for planting season. That is going to impact food availability and food price, which in turn will have a knock-on effect on the levels of hunger that we have today. So in that sense, it's a perfect storm. And maybe this year it's going to be magnified. This is an El Nino year. In El Nino years, you have the kind of climate crises that we've almost become used to become magnified. And now that the global warming is around the 1.5 degrees, you see much more intense El Nino years as well that again have a strong impact on agriculture, on the production of the crops that we all depend on. And that, combined with the conflict that's going on, as I say, is creating really a perfect storm. And this year, it's magnifying that. And we've shown in the work that we do at FAO that we can build, and there is no better place to sort of confront these multiple challenges in one go than investing in agriculture, making agriculture more resistant and resilient, with new seeds, with seeds that are more adapted to today's climate, with new varieties, and Armenia houses many of those with its genetic diversity, in helping with new ways of doing agriculture that reduce emissions, that promote sustainable use of biodiversity, and that's exactly sort of the response, and we have multiple examples to show, but the investments in that approach need to be scaled up. They're nowhere near where we need to be. So the perfect storm is here, maybe more coming this year. We do have the answers, we need to invest in them.
Ivana, a perfect storm in an El Nino year, that's a worrying trend ahead of us. How does it look to you?
I think the world we live in and this compounded crisis reflects on all of us in our private lives, in our organizations, in everything that we do, and it's also affecting the most vulnerable. That is the most concerning part. But from the entity point of view, I think we have to encounter this calmly and try to find the best way out. I am a believer in multilateralism, and I really believe that a place where everybody's voice is heard needs to be preserved, and I see no better place than United Nations for that. And with this state of the world that we are in, and the rifts among member states and among global powers, I think our value is even more in remaining this platform than it was ever before. Of course, the world is changing. We will be also changing. We're encountering this UN80 reform and really taking it into detail from many different views and aspects.
Pedro, what does the storm look like to you?
I would say that just to be both realistic and a little bit optimistic, because if we are not optimistic within the UN system and the multilateral system, then I think that we are not doing fully our job. I would say that we are on a longer than usual rainy season, let's put it that way, with many storms repeating, and then, and this is translating into countries, developing countries, vulnerable countries, suffering one crisis after the other. People forget that many developing countries haven't yet recovered from the COVID pandemic. That was 6 years ago, and they are still suffering those shocks. Now we have the Iran crisis. Iran crisis is pushing up energy prices, right? Because war pushes up energy. Energy pushes up fertilizer. Fertilizer pushes up food prices. And food prices pushes up debt service. The result is that now we have 3.4 billion people living in countries that spend more on servicing their debt that they spend on health or education.
What you're describing sounds like an
ever-whirling
tornado rather than just a rainy season. So I'm just going to put that out there.
Exactly. We need to be able to give the space, the policy space, the fiscal space to countries also to recover for these shocks. Because if they continue to spend if they continue to spend more on debt servicing than they spend on health and education, then they cannot thrive. 42 countries pay 20% of what they earn in their exports to servicing debts. So from wherever you look at that, is really a major impact and a major shock that at the end of the day vulnerable economies are suffering. We need to be there and try to come up with solutions that can elevate the situation.
Minister, the last word from Armenia, our hosts. You chose the theme. How is Armenia riding through the storm, and how do you view this storm?
I believe we are somewhere in between of thunderstorm and tornado. But I don't want to dramatize the situation, because we know that in the past the world has gone through many, many storms, and the humanity has been wise enough to overcome these storms. At the same time, nowadays, the difference is not the intensity of the challenges, but the speed that the new challenges, new issues are emerging before trying to resolve the previous ones. In this regard, I believe that the real task today is to remain resilient and cooperative while riding to the storm.
What a fantastic completion. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and please thank our panelists today.